Welcome to Season 5 of the Long-Winded One podcast. Listen as we showcase original work from top Royal Road authors read by professional voice actors. Hear interviews from your favourite lit RPG and game lit authors. Lastly, listen as the Long-Winded One tries his hand at his first ever lit RPG novel, The Four Treasures.
Excerpt of Mantle of the Gods, written by Kamat. Read by Steve French. Chapter 1. The heat was nearly unbearable. "Hey, Atlas!" The leader of our group called out my name. "We're finished!" The heat got even worse as I came out of the bushes I had been hiding in. As a porter, it was my job to collect the crystals dropped by the monsters that the party defeated. But since I didn't have a mantle, the magic imbuement that allowed adventurers to get stronger by killing monsters in the dungeon, I had to stay clear of the fighting. I hurried over to where the bovine-like monsters had vanished and began picking up the crystals. "You'd think that it would be a bit more pleasant or even colder down here," Paul chuckled as he watched me work. The other adventurers were looking at a map of the dungeon, arguing about where to go next. I nodded in agreement. "It does seem a lot warmer down here than normal." Paul nodded in agreement. "Give it a day or two. I've seen floors where it snowed, rained, was over 100 degrees, and even a tornado all in the same week." He wiped his brow and looked over at the other adventurers. "I think we're done for today." They stopped arguing as they looked at their leader. I expected them to argue, but they just started getting ready to travel. With their mantle-imbued speed, the adventurers could travel a lot faster than a mundane like me, even if I was in great shape for an 18-year-old. With how often the adventurers relied on mundane porters to collect their crystals, the dispatchers had made a rule that adventurers weren't allowed out of the hub if they didn't come back with their porter. Sometimes accidents happened. It was a very dangerous job, and there were monsters everywhere. But in those cases, the adventurers were released once they were cleared of any wrongdoing or negligence. "You good?" Paul asked as I secured the last crystal. I nodded and watched the other adventurers do the same. "Let's go." The black-haired man took off. I struggled to run as fast as I could compared to what seemed like barely jogging to them. I was completely out of breath by the time we made it to the gate that warped us back to the main floor of the dispatcher's hub. Paul took the pack from me once we got to the ring, then activated the console, warping us to the dispatcher's hub. Zeb was a smaller town, so the hub wasn't very large, and there weren't that many parties that were farming this dungeon. Paul was new to town and had only been here for a couple of weeks. As the leader of our party started towards the desk, he stopped and looked at me. "Don't you have someplace you need to be soon?" I tried to hide the excitement I was feeling. This was the year that I turned 18, and once a year the All-Temple came to town and tested those who had just come of age to see if they were worthy of being bestowed a mantle. I was trying not to get my hopes up, but I had a good feeling that I would get a mantle. If I did get a mantle, then I'd be able to leave this godless town and go to the dispatcher school, where I get trained on how to be an adventurer. If I didn't get a mantle, then I'd be back here in the morning, ready to collect monster crystals like I had been doing for the last 4 years. I nodded. "The ceremony's this afternoon." "Well then," Paul shooed me, "you better get going." I started to leave. "Hey, Atlas!" I turned around and barely had enough time to catch one of the crystals that I'd picked up. I stared at it for a moment. I had no idea how much it was worth, and there was a part of me that was afraid I wouldn't be able to sell it. Porters weren't paid very well, but a mundane also couldn't go through a ring with a crystal. This was mainly to eliminate stealing, but it also meant that almost daily, a porter would carry more resources than a whole year's salary. I couldn't believe the generosity. Before I could speak, Paul held up his hands. "Consider it a parting gift from us." I nodded my thanks. "Just remember that if you ever meet us in the dungeon, the first round is on you," one of them hollered. I realized that as a mundane, I might not be able to sell the crystal, But once I received a mantle, I'd be able to cash it out for whatever it was worth. I stashed the crystal in the pocket of my pants. The pants were worn, but they were specially made to be able to enter the dungeon. If I tried to wear regular clothes like a mundane, then I'd wind up naked once I entered the dungeon. I tried to find words, but their leader cut me off. "Now get out of here, Atlas." Paul had a huge smile on his face. They were the best adventurers that I'd ever worked with. I walked out of the one-story building and took a deep breath. Their support was filling me with more confidence. I looked at the sun and realized that it was getting close to the time for the ceremony to start. I took off down the street. I didn't want to be late on the most important day of my life. Chapter 2. I made it just in time. I reached the edge of the crowd moments before the Archbishop got on stage. My tardiness earned me a few nasty looks from the other people, but at least I was there. The crowd was gathered around a stage that was connected to a white tent in the middle of the town park. I assumed the stage had been raised to waist high, so the short older man with a potbelly would be able to stand over everyone else. "Welcome to the mantle ceremony," his voice boomed, silencing the few stray whispers. "The All Temple welcomes you all. It is my pleasure to conduct the ceremony this year in Zeb." It was the same speech he gave every year. After hearing it a few times, all the pomp and circumstance began to lose its glamour. For me, at least. I shifted uncomfortably as I stood at the edge of the crowd, completely enthralled by the item in the middle of the stage that was covered in a gold-trimmed white sheet. I knew that under the sheet was a divining crystal. It was so large that it took a team of 4 priests to move it. It also shone like nothing else I had ever witnessed. I shuddered when I thought about how it might change my life in a little while. How it might change a lot of our lives. Zeb wasn't a very large town, considering it had a dungeon entrance. It would have been even bigger if the sections of floors it was connected to had better quality monsters, but there wasn't a large demand for the bovine creatures that roamed its grassy floors. Which meant that we were in a town of barely 5,000 people. Of those, maybe 30 of us were coming of age this year, and judging from what I'd seen in past years, about half of us would be granted a mantle, most of which would be heirs of nobility. Having a mantle granted more perks than just increased physical changes. There was a different way that adventurers were treated outside the dungeon as well. Eventually, this led to adventurers holding most of the positions of power, while the mundane did the tasks that were beneath them. The term nobility had started as an insult, a way to throw a jab at the adventurers who weren't going into the dungeon anymore so that they could lord over the common people. Unfortunately, instead of being offended, the topside adventurers embraced the title and began to refine it. There was an entire system of ranks and benefits that I barely understood, but the one easy thing to grasp was that mantles almost always begat mantles. Also, since the ceremonies were conducted in public like this, most of the nobility would have their heir checked before the official ceremony. In the unlikely event the heir was mundane, there would be some reason why they weren't able to attend, for the family to save face. "It is the divine duty of adventurers to delve deeper into the dungeons to unlock the secrets that it holds. All adventurers..." The Archbishop was at the part where the dungeons were made by the gods. In one of the converted places where the gods walked among the people, this might have been better received, but Zeb was in the godless zone. It wasn't just snubbed by adventurers. It was also snubbed by the gods who were always fighting over followers. There were gods who had been around for more than 200 years, and there were others who had risen to power just a decade or 2 ago. Some people whispered that they weren't gods, but absurdly high-level adventurers. Even if they were, the power they wielded was so far above that of the average adventurer that they might as well be gods. This meant that when they fought over territory, whole cities could be leveled. I had become an orphan during one of those city-leveling battles, which still left a bad taste in my mouth toward the gods. It had been hard growing up not knowing who my parents were, but there were many others like me, brought to the All Temple at a young age where we were cared and taught, then shipped off to the dispatchers as soon as we were able to work. My ears perked up as the Archbishop reached the end of his speech. Now, would all of you not undergoing the trial please sit down? The old man said it as an order, despite being phrased as a question. Most of the crowd dropped at the same time. The nobles and some of the wealthier mundanes had brought seats, but the majority of the crowd sat on the ground. I tried to will my heart to slow down as I counted 21 of us still standing. The Archbishop pointed his bony finger at a man in the front row. It was about to begin. This has been Mantle of the Gods, written by Kamat, read by Steve French. Produced for Season 5 of the Long-Winded One podcast. The author and/or any present or future publishing company retains all of the rights for the associated work. This work was read by permission of the author. You can find more information on me, Steve French, at my website, stevefrenchvo.com, and I can also be found on social media under the handle @SteveFrenchVO.
Thank you for joining us down this Lit RPG deep dive. Please consider giving us a review on Apple Podcasts and visit us over at longwinded.one, where you can see past episodes and find all of our socials, even our new Discord server. We hope you enjoy.